Right now, I think the Resident Evil franchise faces a very unique problem that not a lot of franchises ever make it to or have the privilege of having. And that problem is kind of a strange one, but I'll explain. Imagine you get so good at something that you run out of ways to make it better. I think that's kind of where Resident Evil is at right now. Resident Evil 9 feels like the most complete version of the series we've ever had, and that's where things get kind of weird, because if this is what Resident Evil looks like at its best, then what comes next? And I don't mean that in a bad way. This isn't like the franchise is falling off or it's running out of ideas. It's a problem that happens when you refine something as long as Resident Evil has and create the perfect version of your game. That tail also creates a problem. That problem is once you get there, once you reach that perfect version, doing more of the same isn't enough anymore. And that's the reason why this happens, is because Resident Evil 9 doesn't just do one thing well, it kind of does everything well. All the greatest things that a Resident Evil game does, this game gives to you on what feels like an extra polished plate ready to be consumed. You've got the slower horror stuff that actually feels tense, moments where the game makes you think instead of just throwing enemies at you. The puzzles feel like a core part of the experience and like baked into the game in a natural way that feels natural and not just something to rush through or like they were placed there for the sake of it. Then on the other side, you've got those big action moments that we all love that became popularized with Resident Evil 4. They're over the top, they're campy, they're full of silly one-liners, and they don't take themselves too seriously, while not really ever stepping into that over goofy territory. Since the RE4 games, there have always been two distinct identities for the Resident Evil franchise: scary survival horror and over-the-top action blockbuster. Some fans just enjoy the classic formula of like inventory management, tight, tense fights, and spooky atmosphere, and some prefer the big bombastic gunfights and the explosions of the more action-based games. I'd argue that Resident Evil 8 was the first Resident Evil game to truly mix these two formulas together in a synergetic way, and then Resident Evil 9 took everything they had learned from the previous games and basically perfected it. That might actually be the most impressive part about Resident Evil 9. It's not just jumping back and forth between two completely different identities. It all feels like it actually belongs together. And that's something that the series has kind of struggled with before. Some games leaned too far into the action, others leaned a little bit too much into the slow horror, but RE9 doesn't really just pick one, it just balances everything. And it doesn't do it in a way that feels forced or like, here, we're trying to give you the best of both worlds. It feels like those two things were supposed to be combined in the first place. Nothing feels forced or like it was just included for the sake of it being there and ticking whatever box. It just feels like an amalgamation of everything that worked before in the franchise, blended together to make one perfect, cohesive product. Resident Evil 9 doesn't feel like something new. It feels like a Resident Evil game they've been building towards the entire time, and this game is just all the different styles and pieces come together. And normally, I guess that would be a great thing, but it does leave the franchise in kind of an awkward position. Before we continue though, I just want to give my usual big thank you to the community for everything you guys have been doing for the channel. All your amazing comments and likes and hypes have really started to push the channel forward, and I obviously really appreciate that. For anybody new here, we hang out and talk about video game industry and about video games that I feel like have a bigger thing around them beyond just like a basic review, and things that are important to our hobby and have like a bigger conversation around them. So if that sounds like your cup of tea or something you're into, then hit the sub button or the like button. All that kind of stuff helps the community obviously grow. And if you enjoy the video, it helps you come back again and see me again. So anyways, with all that done, let's get back into it. Here's the problem. When something feels complete, it becomes really hard to actually move it forward. You can make it better, you can polish it, but you're not really changing anything anymore. And that's where things start to feel a little too familiar. Not in a bad way, just kind of predictable. You know what you're getting, you know how it's going to play, and over time, that kind of starts to lose its impact. Because part of what made Resident Evil so good, I think, for so long, was not knowing exactly what it was going to be next. Was it going to be a horror game? Was it going to be an action game? Was it going to be a mix of the two? Was it going to be first person? Was it going to be your classic third person? Were they going to do the fixed cameras again? How would the game play different from the previous one was always a big question going into the next Resident Evil game. Now those questions don't really exist because they've managed to find a way to combine and give us all of that in one single experience. But when you hit a version that feels this complete, I kind of think you kind of boxed yourself in, because now anything you do next either feels like the same, which kind of goes against what Resident Evil has always done, or it risks kind of breaking what already works. And that ceiling is the biggest factor for any sequel, I think, in Resident Evil moving forward. Not a drop in quality, not like a decline, just a point where doing more of the same doesn't really hit the same anymore. And Resident Evil 9 feels like the best version of everything that worked before, combined into what feels like, to me, a final hurrah before the next big shakeup. For some franchises, this may pose an issue, but I'll tell you exactly why for Resident Evil this isn't an issue at all. This isn't a series that's ever really stayed the same. It's constantly changed up its formula in one way or another. Different perspectives, different styles, different pacing. And those changes is the reasons it's still around today. That's what's kept it from getting stale in the first place. Reinvention isn't really risky for Resident Evil. It's kind of the whole reason it works. The best version of this series didn't come from only refining the same idea over and over again. It came from changing it, which is why what they choose to do next matters so much. If RE10 just follows this up the same way, even if it's great, it's gonna feel like more of the same. And that's where the drop happens, not in quality, but just in impact. And being the big rounded 10 number, I really don't think they're gonna do that. So you can only refine something, like I said, for so many times before it stops feeling new. And Resident Evil has never been about staying the same. It's always been about changing things up just to keep things fresh. So it doesn't need another polished version of this formula that we now have with Resident Evil 9, which is a perfected version of all the previous formulas combined into one. We got the perfect version now with RE9. Now it needs to go and do something different again. Not necessarily bigger, not some massive overhaul just for the sake of it, but like an actual change in direction, something that makes it feel new again. The same way Resident Evil 4 did, the same way Resident Evil 7 did, the same way 8 kind of felt like a step in a different direction as well. Because if it doesn't, then you're just repeating what's already been done, and I think that's less risk to a loyal fan base, sure, but it's still not what's good for the franchise. RE10 could be exactly the same as RE9 and still be a fantastic game worth buying, but that's never been what the franchise is about or how they treat their sequels. And for most people who want to do more of the same, that's kind of what the remakes are for. Those aren't going anywhere anytime soon. They're keeping that classic Resident Evil style alive. The classic feel of those older games is all still there. And if anything, it looks like they're doubling down on that too, with more remakes already happening and leaks confirming they're even remaking the original RE1 again. So that version of Resident Evil isn't disappearing, which means the mainline games don't need to protect that core experience anymore, just like they didn't do with RE4 and RE7 and when they stepped away again. So they don't need to play it safe. They can actually just move forward because the old formula already has its own lane. It's safe with the remakes. So you don't need to worry about if something new is a shakeup and kind of in a different direction, because both versions of Resident Evil will still exist. When you look at the series as a whole, it's kind of actually insane how consistent it's been. There aren't many franchises outside of the JRPG genre with this many entries that still hit this hard and still hit this well and are still this consistent across this amount of time, across different generations, different styles, different directions. Resident Evil has stayed relevant the entire time. And that doesn't just happen by accident. That comes from knowing when to stick with what works and when to change things up before it gets stale. It's like when you see old bands always have like a new sound with a new CD. If you just keep doing the same thing over and over again, it never hits as hard and you will start to fade away. And that applies to pretty much anything. You always need to be changing things up. So that's something most franchises that last this long obviously struggle with, but Resident Evil has managed to avoid any kind of struggle with that for decades. Resident Evil isn't in a bad spot at all. It's actually in one of the best spots it's ever been, but that's exactly what makes the next game so important, because Resident Evil 9 feels like the most complete version of everything this series has been building towards. then when you hit that point, you don't just keep going the same way. You either change things up again or you start repeating yourself. And Resident Evil has never really been a series that just repeats itself. So now it's at that point of, so what comes next? And I thought we'd take a few minutes to actually talk about that. What could come next? And to me, this is truly the interesting part. There was rumors for a while that Resident Evil 9 was originally supposed to be more open world. And if you actually look into the development a bit, it seems like that wasn't just rumors or isn't even just rumors. It sounds like something they genuinely experimented on with like early on in the development. And that's what I'm kind of coming back to now, because when you look at this series, the biggest moments didn't come from playing it safe. They came from the big changes, right? Resident Evil 7 didn't just feel like another entry. It felt like a reset. Same thing with RE4 back in the day. It felt like a completely different direction with the more action focused, and it ended up redefining the series. So I kind of feel like the next games need to do that again. A big jump with like an actual change up in the formula. And it needs to obviously stay a horror game at its core. But I think there's a lot of genres that Resident Evil could lean towards that would work. And not necessarily in the same way of like a big giant shakeup, but it needs that same level of change. And I think there's a few directions it could go. Maybe it's, like I said, all about bringing in new ideas from other genres. Maybe the same way RE7 pulled from like the first person genre and like the survival horror aspect. They could do that again. And now they've basically perfected the system where you can swap between first and third person seamlessly. That alone isn't going to be enough anymore, but I think it's something they could lean into more. That was a cool evolution, but it's not like a reinvention of the series though. They need something bigger than just like a camera perspective change this time. Maybe it's the gameplay. Maybe it's kind of like the structure of the game. Maybe it's how you interact with the world. Maybe they could do some kind of system where there's like ghosts from the past and you other players, the way that you do in Death Stranding, you can leave help for other players if you're connected to online, or leave messages for other players. I don't know. That's probably not even the greatest idea because people would just spoil things, but some kind of other system that leans into some other genre in a little bit of a different way, I think is what's needed. I don't think it needs to be something we can clearly even define right now. And honestly, one of the easiest ways that they could just make the series feel fresh again without completely changing it up is just changing the setting and the characters. That's something Resident Evil has always been really good at. And you saw a bit of that with RE8. Like, we don't need more zombies. We don't need another mansion. We don't need the same environments we've already gone through over and over again. Put us somewhere completely different, and then you could keep the same kind of gameplay loops, but because the areas and the environments and the characters were so different than what we've experienced before, that would be a big enough shakeup, I think. Giving us a setting that we've never even thought about yet would be cool. Remember when they did Jason in space? I'm not saying Resident Evil needs to go to space. That's Dead Space. We already have that for that. But I'm saying something like that. Something like where RE8 was now werewolves and crazy stuff. What if they did something like in Egypt and there was mummies and tombs and like, I don't know, but they need to do something, I think, a little bit of a different setting. And that would be a big enough change to make things different enough to warrant, okay, here's the big shakeup. New types of enemies, like a new atmosphere, something that just feels unfamiliar is what I'm saying. Because I think that alone, even with a similar like gameplay foundation, could make it feel like a brand new experience. And please don't go disliking the video because I'm suggesting Resident Evil in space or Resident Evil in Egypt. I'm not saying that. I'm saying those as examples of something we could change in the formula as far as the environments. We need to do Resident Evil in, we've done tropical environments. I don't know, but we need to think of a cool new environment. That's not my job to think of. That's theirs. But you guys get what I'm saying. And you could experiment in other ways too. Maybe there's some kind of, like I said, light multiplayer element that actually fits this time without going off the rails like RE-verse did. Maybe there's something that multiple characters working together, kind of like back with the RE6 formula, but not done in a poor way the way it did it, solving things in different ways or cooperatively, kind of like what they tried in RE6, but with a mix of the RE5 formula as far as co-op. I don't know. There's just a lot they could do. But at the same time, I don't think it needs to be like forced either, because the reality is they've earned a lot of trust, and whatever direction they choose to go on is probably going to be pretty good. I'm really curious what direction that actually is though. And more importantly though, I'm more curious what you guys think, because I know there's going to be way bigger RE fans than I am. watching this video. So you guys tell me where the franchise is heading. What should be next? And do you guys think like a change up in the environments is good enough of a shakeup? Or do you think we need something like with the RE4 and the RE6 or RE7, excuse me, change up in formula of the actual gameplay? I don't know, but it's going to be something. We know they're not just going to do more of the same. So you guys always seem to come up with better ideas than I do. So let me know in the comments what you guys think those should be and what you think they're going to do next. Anyways, you guys always know from my previous videos as well, my favorite part of YouTube and all of this stuff is just interacting with you guys in the comments. So I will be down there answering everybody and shooting off theories, and hopefully you guys want to go and do that with me. So anyways, this feels like a good place to leave things off. So we'll end the video here, but I just want to say, I hope you guys were able to think about something with the RE franchise that maybe you weren't thinking about before. And this video was able to spark some kind of, you know, I wonder what's going to go next. So if it did, leave a like. That'll really help. I appreciate it. And also, like I said, if I didn't make it clear enough earlier, RE9 is definitely everything people hyped it up to be. It's fantastic. It's a great addition to the franchise, and I really can't wait to see what they do next. And from one fan to another, thank you for choosing to spend your time with me today, and I'll see you guys in the next one.